Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be, and whether you're watching live or archived. And welcome to episode number 60 of Nautel's Transmission Talk Tuesday webinar series. And today we're talking about networking. Not the cool kind of networking where you can hang around and have a beer. Well, I guess you could, but that's not really the plan for today. As always, I try to find people smarter than me. That's usually pretty easy to do, and we've assembled quite a cast today. Coming at us from he likes to perennially remind us, the warm state of Florida. We've got Kevin Trueblood, the Associate General Manager at Wgcu Public Media. Kevin, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, we recovered quickly from our frosty temperatures. I'm very thankful for that.
Now, in fairness, Kevin, you're originally from Illinois and then Wisconsin for a lot of years, if I recall, and the trip out further west in between.
Actually, Iowa, if you consider that way further out west. Yeah, I was there for about a year. But yeah, started my career in Illinois, spent several years in Wisconsin, and enjoying my time here in Florida now. Maybe a retiree, who knows? We'll see what happens.
Going to say you're a little young to be thinking about that, but hey, you've got to start sometime. Moving a little further north, although he's a lot closer to you today, we've got the IT and Engineering Director for Rhode Island Public Radio, the Publix Radio, Aaron Reed. Aaron, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Hey, did I get the state of the group slogan right? The radio.
Yeah. The company name is Rhode Island Public Radio, but we brand as the Publix Radio.
Awesome, I did get that right. And you've covered both coasts over the years. You've been out west. You've done engineering director. You've done general manager stuff up at I forget the call sign, but it was up Finger Lakes, right?
Finger Lakes Public Radio, WEOS, and I did a turn out at KCSB at UC Santa Barbara, and now I'm in Rhode Island.
So we've got both manager engineers, and then to geek the thing totally out, we got, of course, Alex Hartman, who's currently with Wisconsin Public Radio, where Kevin used to be at one point. And well, Alex, welcome back. It's been what, a whole week?
I know, it's just so long. Can't keep me away. And it's a public radio adventure today, apparently. So.
Well, that was done kind of on purpose, but not really. It's just that typically the public radio guys, two things. Number one, I don't know whether it's organization or budget, but you tend to have a little more time to talk. Number two, and probably more importantly, you tend to do a lot more network type stuff where you're configuring to get to different stations and different facilities, or connecting back to NPR, CPB, whatever have you. So that was kind of by design, and we blame Alex because Alex is the one that volunteered Kevin and Aaron for this. So.
I was going to say, by the way, WPR looks a lot different than I remember it. It looks like a basement. They've moved.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the shop looks the same as if it was over in Wisconsin, but.
So I made the running joke. Alex's wife was talking about his birthday not too long ago, and I asked her if she was going to drag him out of the dungeon of dork and despair. All right. On that note, so Graham has already made the comment in the questions that he likes your VU meter shirt there, Aaron, and it was definitely appropriate attire for today. Let's see, Wilson wants to know, is this PREC? So again, the public radio contingent was not missed. And Dan mentions he doesn't network, he multitasks. Now, my running joke is, for me, as I get older and the ADD settles in a little more firmly, multitasking for me is doing several things poorly. So I try not to do that, but it never works well. All right, mandatory housekeeping stuff before we get rolling. You've got the little control panel. If you don't have the little control panel, there's a little orange arrow where you can see the little control panel. In that little control panel, there's a place to type in questions. We also take comments, criticisms, concerns, sarcasm, snark, and any of the other C or S words that you can think of. You can keep it PG-13 or not, I don't care, because we do definitely edit this stuff before I put it on air, so to speak. If you have a mic and you're not shy, hit the hand wavy icon. We'll unmute you, make you part of the conversation. For that, I do ask you keep it PG-13. I don't want to have to exercise the dump button that I don't have. So there you go.
Wield the banhammer. That part.
On that point, now that we've opened the trapdoor, if you are an SBE member, this does qualify for half of a recertification credit. If you're not an SBE member, why not? Kevin, you're pretty active in SBE too, as I recall.
A little bit, yes, the national secretary. So I've been part of I started on the National Board of Directors, it'd be 5 years ago now. And so I've been the secretary for the last 3, approximately. So yeah, I stay busy.
So there you go. We'll send Kevin the list of attendees at the end of this, and you all get your half credits. Now it's up to you to keep track of your own stuff here, folks. All right, moving forward. So things to cover, and this is sort of the introduction. Now, the big thing to remember, and Alex has mentioned this before, other folks have mentioned it, learning networking is not something you're going to do in an hour and a bit with us. I mean, the smart as these folks are, it's, typically what's a Cisco course run, Alex? That's more than a couple of days.
Oh yeah. If you're going for your entry CCNA, you can figure easily 3 to 4 months of practice, test, and study guide before you actually are ready for the test.
Right. So we're going to do this as best we can, but it is going to be a bird's eye view just by nature of the fact that we only have an hour. We will talk about some of the ways to structure a network, what makes a good network, what makes a bad network, and why you shouldn't do it, and why most of us do. And a little bit of everything like that. And, I'll kind of pick on both of you as we go along, or all three of you. But, and meanwhile, Mr. Disembodied Voice, shout out to Ed in the background for herding the cats. So Ed, thank you very much for all you do as well.
You're welcome.
I know he's not afraid to unmute if he has to. And I was making the joke, I've got a whole bunch of contractors here, so that if you hear a bunch of noise in the background, I will try to mute. For the most part, we're going to rely on the directionality and the up close performance of this cheap little USB microphone. So we'll see how that works. Shane's in the, it's funny because I'm sitting here, I've got the chat window open. Ed says, hey, Shane Tobin's here if you need to open somebody's mic. And meanwhile, in the questions comments, Shane's going, I've got nothing to add that these three wouldn't already say. Great panel. So there you go. So pat in the back, guys.
Boo.
Speaking of deserting the cold and heading to the warm, right?
Right.
So Shane's down in Sacramento for anybody that doesn't know him, but he got there by way of Minnesota and Wyoming, and definitely
Michigan.
earned all the cold weather areas except for Canada. One thing Ed did mention in the chat is that this will be the first of a 3-4 part series. So we are going to break down some of this stuff into smaller chunks as much as we can. So yeah, absolutely. Throw the questions at us and we will get rolling. Now, the big problem we've got is I've already broken my computer once today, so I'm relying on the keyboard, and that'll be fun. We ask when you register for the advanced questions, and this is one of those things that I always try to, well, I just started putting them up. I always have a printout of them, and I always forget to refer to it. So having it up on the screen to the side will help me a little bit too. But we'll hit on port forwarding, firewalls, best practices, routers, switches, hubs. All of those will be included in the conversation. A couple of thoughts on online courses. The one thing I don't think we have in here is the one about Win 10 online, NetBIOS messed up, how to subnet. Kevin, you had a thought on that earlier. And he's like, oh, damn it, that was tongue in cheek.
You put me on the spot already. No, we can dive into those questions in a little more detail, but there was 2 first thoughts I had to that, because the question was they put a Windows 10 machine online or on their network, and after that their whole NetBIOS had messed up access to resources. And I'm going to go ahead and presume that there was a good reason why the NetBIOS was set up in the first place. Maybe there's an old system or something that you're accessing on the network. But kind of getting the ball rolling on questions. That one in particular was, you don't really need NetBIOS in 2022. TCP/IP kind of took over and lets you do a lot of that. But the other thought is that Windows 10 also disables SMB1 by default. And if you don't enable that, that can cause you problems with network resources as well. But SMB1 is also disabled by default for a reason, and that's because it's largely insecure. So, it's kind of one of those things that, again, I'm assuming there's a good reason for it, but probably the reason why NetBIOS was disabled was probably because you don't need it or it's messing up. There's probably a way around what you're trying to do.
My first inclination is, as a person who has collected various ages of hardware, if you have like an old NAS or network share from an old like Windows 2003 server, because dear God, we all have those, right? That, yeah, it's disabled and they can't get to the share because of that. So 99% of the time, it's either you're going to pay a fortune to get up to server 2019, or you just enable and accept the risk of running NetBIOS.
Yeah, and you can enable SMB1. As I said, that's one of the big ones. Is you have
it's
to
just
enable
off by
SMB1.
default. It's
Yeah,
not
but
installed by default.
yeah, Windows is kind of like they bury it pretty deeply in the settings because they're like, are you sure you want to enable it? Are you really sure you want to do that?
And that's one of those things that is, and I like to think it, well, I don't like to think about that at all, but Windows and security don't really belong in the same sentence, except unless the word risk is in there as well. But
Windows, Microsoft in the past like 5 years has really stepped up their game when it comes to the security level, to the chagrin of the entire user base, which is 90% of the world. They have to sacrifice the usability for adding some security, and they've gotten flamed for years over having no security. Well, now that they start adding it, damned if you do, damned if you don't, right?
Yeah. And that's a big deal, though. And I mean, that's one of the things that, and see, when I started at Nautel, I've said this a million times before, but we had an 8088 and an 8086, say that 5 times fast, connected with a piece of coax running Lantastic. And that was the entire company network. And I mean, state of the art, right? But now we've evolved to the point where we've got several hundred terminals spanning 4 facilities on 2 different continents and 3 different countries. And, all of it's networked together, and we've gotten to a lot more of a zero trust position on this stuff. And we talked about that last week during security. Zero trust is basically deny everybody everything and then grant it only as needed. And that's really, when you get right down to it. Aaron, so what do you guys do for security wise? And I mean, I'm getting ahead because we'll talk about it again more, but zero trust is just the thing that comes to mind as one of the better ways for building a network.
It is. I mean, we probably represent more of a, the small business aspect of things. I mean, we're a 20-person company. Right now, most of our user IT is being outsourced to a third-party company, and they're locally based, and they actually do a pretty good job. I'm not unhappy with what they've been doing. They've taken a lot of hassle off my plate. So almost to the point where, honestly, I'm not entirely sure what level, how close we are to zero trust on that, because they handle it for me. But I can tell you that, I mean, in general, I have often gotten questions from our staff. They're like, why isn't X working? And I'm like, did you call ABS when you tried to install that? And they say no. And I'm like, go call ABS. They manage the laptop security. They do all that stuff. And 9 times out of 10, it's because they're either trying to install something they shouldn't be installing, or well, actually, that's probably 1 time out of 10. The other 9 times, it's because something needed to be enabled in order to let them install it. So I guess we're fairly close to zero trust to begin with, for exactly the reasons you described. That said, I can tell you on all the networks that I'm more personally responsible for, like our EncoDAD automation or like our Livewire networks, I keep that stuff on my plate. I don't outsource that. I am constantly running into, bashing my head against the wall, wondering why something isn't working. And then I remember the first rule of Windows, which is go disable the firewall and see if it starts working. And I swear to God, 95 times out of 100, that solves the problem. It's something, even if I've set up a rule that says allow this, it doesn't matter. Something else somewhere in the firewall is blocking it from working.
Yep.
And then I have to trace. Obviously, I don't just leave it disabled. I go back and trace and figure out what the heck's wrong and
Right.
modify the firewall accordingly. But it's utterly maddening on that front. So, but I will say
Well,
that's,
and I mean,
yeah.
translating that to transmitter, I mean, it's like bypassing an interlock. You know, you can do it for now, but you're better off figuring out why it was an issue to begin with.
Yeah, do it as a diagnostic tool. Don't do it as a solution.
Right. So Alex, in a burst of incredible research, actually, I think it was Google, but he sent me this this awesome diagram of a network, an ideal network. And so the cool thing, the one thing I caught on it when I at first glance, of course, you see two different subnets, each with their own switch going to a router, and that's all great. But they firewall the wireless access point. Alex, talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's as we all know, RF is RF. It's one thing we actually know how to do well when it comes to this world. Well, when it comes to RF and IT, it's kind of the new frontier of hacking and penetration testing and stuff like that. Knowing that most wireless stuff, when you do encryption like that.
Was that just me, or did Alex just lose his audio?
No, Alex, you lost your audio.
I lost my audio.
Oh, there it
There's
is.
back.
There it is. Did you
You
mute
say
me?
his mouth was moving. His mouth was moving, but nobody was home. No, I didn't.
That's all right. Use that dump
All right.
button.
All right. Yeah, that's a dump one I have. I'll blame Jeff. So RF is RF. In the IT realm, the security used for wireless is already known broken. So all it takes is a bunch of guys using laptops, cell phones, whatever, to get enough traffic to decrypt the key. Very, very fast. In a business environment, you can do that in about 10 minutes. So the reason why you want a firewall there on your wireless is to obviously block those users away from the rest of the desktop, your servers, the rest of your network, so on and so forth. So you really should, your wireless network is considered untrusted at that point, because you really don't know where the bits are flying, unlike a wire where you know the wire is. So yes, you should firewall at the very least, do an intrusion prevention at the firewall border of your wireless. Again, this is ideal. This is what the 2022 network of today looks like. I know a lot of your guys' networks don't look anything like this. It looks more like a spaghetti mess on the floor, like a lot of places. But ideally, this is at its simplest form, a proper network in 2022.
And I
By
mean,
the way,
one of the
Alex,
things, yeah.
I wanted to point out here, because somebody had asked the question about, you know, where to put routers and things like that. And I was actually thinking about that when you brought this, when this chart was brought up, because at its simplest, you talk about your firewall and your wireless access point. If you're a small operation, you could just get one of those, you know, Wi-Fi routers, put that on your network, and that does exactly this. Your Wi-Fi is now completely segregated from your traffic, and we're talking, you know, some $30 TP link you bought at Walmart.
Right, which in the last week's episode that you obviously didn't watch, we're telling people don't do that. Don't buy the $30 TP link. You have money. There's money involved in this picture, so
you'll see
take it
why.
seriously.
Now, the other thing to think about with this, and this was mentioned in the advanced question, somebody was asking for like the bird's eye just definition between, or differences between router, switch, and hub. And as I understand it, basically a hub throws all the data all the time everywhere. A switch directs it within that subnet or within that network, and depending whether layer 2 or layer 3, and then a router very specifically steers the data.
So, I mean, IT folks are just about as dry as you can get right next to RF engineers. So a router routes, a switch switches, and a hub just rolls around. So
I was going to wait to hear him say a hub hubs, but
right. So, and in that respect, one of the things you have to remember is wireless Wi-Fi is a hub topology. It goes everywhere all the time. It is not a switched network. It is not a routed network. It is a hub-based solution. So if you're going from one device to the next, all of them can see it. That's why it's inherently insecure.
Cool. So Aaron, any other thoughts about overall network topology that come to mind?
Well, one thing
And
I was
we got to say that the other thing to remember is too that you and Kevin both can speak to this from the GM aspect as well, like dollars and cents and things like that, which is something that, of course, Alex and I are used to spending money, but not so much on trying to figure out how to control that spend.
well, this actually doesn't speak too much to that, but one thing I was curious to get Alex's take on was whether or not he views having two separate firewalls as important, or one device serving for both that's segmented, like
You
a guest
can,
network.
right, you can do it in one device. This was a simplified design, more to understand what you're doing. You know, like you said, you know, Kevin had mentioned, you can get a box. Let's not use TP-Link, but we can use Cisco, we can use FortiGate, we can use, you know, Juniper, or any of the high-end stuff, or even the mid-grade stuff, you know, that you can find out there, Cisco Small Business, whatever, that will have these all-in-one type of solutions where there's firewalls and you can direct which ports do what. You know, it's SD, software defined. So, you know, one port is your router port going to your internet provider, and then there's a firewall in there, and then you have your zero trust network, or your DMZ, for your servers like your Comrexes and stuff like that that need a static IP or a public IP address, but you don't want them to get into the rest of your network. You know, those types of things. So there are devices out there in the enterprise that are not much more expensive than, you know, say, if you added up the hours you spent troubleshooting your network because you bought the $30 TP-Link, you could afford a FortiGate. You know, things like that. So yes, there are devices that can turn that firewall, router, switch, and wireless access point into one device, and you define what it is. And if you don't have the technical skill to do that, the reason why you go to these companies is because they do. You know, if you don't trust yourself enough to know what you're doing by watching a couple of YouTube videos, going to go get a little certificate or something from that company to be certified in that hardware, call them. You know, for a couple $100, they will absolutely help you out and get it configured for your point of presence.
Then, I mean, that comes back to, I guess it's the age-old juggling act that we do all the time. Whether you buy one generic box and then learn what's required to subdivide and partition it for multiple purposes, or whether you buy multiple purpose-built boxes, which potentially cost less, you know, each, but aggregate may cost more. However, you don't have the learning curve and the time. So, you know, what do they say? Time or money? It's going to be one or the other.
Right. So, I mean, in the simplified factor, yes, there are those appliances out there. To bring it back to an older term that, you know, I know Jeff will get this one. Do you get the bookshelf stereo or do you get the component stereo? You know,
Why not
if
both?
you think about it, right? Or why not both? So you can have certain things that are appliances, but in this diagram, just to break it out to show each individual function, you can get just a firewall, you can get just a router, you can get just a switch, you can get just a wireless access point, and separate all these devices out as points of failure items.
Yeah.
There's pros and cons to both sides.
The big thing too, and we'd mentioned this last week, is that it's absolutely critical that you document this, that you map it, that you know what needs to connect to what. I mean, for example, in this diagram, we've got two subnets shown, each one under a switch. I may have one computer in traffic that needs to talk to one computer in billing, but that doesn't mean every computer in one department needs to talk to every computer in the other. And again, that's where zero trust comes back in, and where having a properly configured system allows you to let only who needs to talk to who needs to, who do they,
and that brings up another one of the questions that was asked prior to today's show here is, how do you make two routers work on your network? One, don't. It's just bad juju unless you really, I mean, that's an advanced level thing to actually route subnets with routers internally. That is definitely not for the layman. The smaller, you know, like a Rhode Island Public Radio would have no need for two routers in their facility. Kevin, on the other hand, at GCU probably does have multiple routers.
And there goes Alex's audio again.
Is that working now? I see it blinking at me. So the multiple router factor, you don't really need that in most environments unless you're hitting the enterprise. That's why if you look at this, say you've got one switch there, so you got your traffic and billings network, but you've got your automation network. The router knows about both of them. So if one guy over here needs to get to one guy over here, it will go through the router to find it. And that's its job. It routes traffic. So if you have multiples, then things don't know where to go.
Now, and
Yeah,
I have to make
one thing I could think of, I think people might do that just out of just trying as kind of a rudimentary way to segment traffic, perhaps, and try and isolate it, not realizing that there is a better way to do it, because you can get even some basic routers, some basic firewalls and routers that will do multiple VLANs, that will do multiple subnets for you within that one box, and then you have to get the managed switches that handle all of that. But I agree with you, Alex. The best way to do the multiple routers is just to have it in one box. That's where all your traffic goes back to.
Yep.
I can think of one possible exception to that, and it's not to take away from the fact that you guys are absolutely correct, but I can think of one case where we're doing it exactly this. Well, not quite the way you're thinking of, Alex. I can see the grimace forming on your face already. We have a wireless Ethernet path, STL, over licensed 11 gigahertz between our studios down to a transmitter site. And ultimately how I decided to do it was just that I'm treating that path as if it were an ISP, basically, just from the outside world. And then I have a separate router, gateway, whatever you want to call it, at the transmitter site. And one of the WAN ports is getting connectivity technically through the LAN at the other end.
And in that instance, you're talking about what in the IT realm is called a branch office.
Yeah.
So, at that point, yes, that is perfectly appropriate because it is a distant location where you would have an internal router to another subnet, whether that's for running a VPN over or, even transparent bridging just to bridge two networks together so you can keep them logically separate. Absolutely, that is perfectly fine. For today's exercise, as a high-level overview, if you're on your wired network and you want to keep your automation network separate away from your salespeople, don't put another router in.
No. Yeah, don't do that.
And for what you're describing too is almost like this diagram where your off-premise stuff is being firewalled by the second router. So the router serving almost the exact purpose as shown in this diagram. So that works out. Now, a couple of questions they've been flowing in here, and I've sort of been letting them scroll by as I listen to the conversation because I learned more from these than probably the folks attending. But one comment about Alex never having mic problems when he worked for Nautel. Anyway, that's a little side note. I did get a request for Aaron and Alex where you got your T-shirts. I'm thinking Redbubble, but I don't know. So
I found a link on Facebook and just gave him my money. So
that sounds like a recipe for success.
He's the guy that clicks the links. Yeah.
Now, this I got from a place called Dream Tea, except there was an extra one. There was either one or two extra T's. I'm sorry, extra E's in addition to the two that you would expect there. And the only thing is that they're a little bit more expensive than your average T-shirt, and they take about 3 months to actually ship them.
Good to know, though.
Now, this is actually like a spring T-shirt store, so.
There you go. Back onto the technical stuff. Seems that most companies that make firewall are moving to the subscription format. Can you recommend a firewall for a small nonprofit radio station, preferably one that works with a GUI? In other words, I don't need to have a full-blown education in that particular firewall to be able to run it.
Sure. No. There's a reason why firewall design and stuff like that is actually a separate track in a lot of education programs. Let's use Cisco because that's what I know. I'm Cisco certified, have been for 20 plus years. Is you have one that's routing and switching, you have one that's wireless, you have one that's telephony, you have another one that is just security, and they focus on those specific skills. When you get into designing a firewall and how that all interoperates at a small business level, Aruba makes stuff. If you're into the enterprise level stuff, help me out here, guys. FortiGate is another one, but that is a little bit more advanced.
Yeah.
Cisco
You can
Small
try
Business
Ubiquity,
has
I
stuff.
suppose.
Yeah,
Ubiquity's Unify is pretty good. Again, it's not for the weak-hearted. Definitely worth having a lab to try what you want to do before you implement it in production, because the next thing you know, you could take everything offline without even realizing it.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of it comes back to your requirement. I mean, I've got an Aris cable modem here that's got a hardware firewall built into it, but without knowing what exactly I'm doing when I go clicking around in it, I don't actually know whether I'm firewalling anything.
Right. There's another company out there called MikroTik, and again, to the manager types who control the money, it looks very attractive because it's like $200, and it looks enterprise because it is. But once you get into that UI, you're reading books like this to understand how to change an IP address.
Yeah.
So not exactly user friendly. It's definitely a power user type of thing. There are software firewalls like pfSense and OpenSense out there that you could roll your own, but again, you are the warranty and the support. Other things that the reason why those subscription models exist is, let's use the Log4j example. 0-day intrusion prevention. So you're paying for those updates to come down from that service to know about those problems before you do, because you probably don't have the time to go home and research these at night, then get ready to install a patch into your network to figure that out. They do that for you, and that's that subscription, and that's what you're paying for.
Yeah. Now,
In
I see
fact,
Kirk Harnack's on here, and Kirk's talking about MikroTik too, and has them in all stations. I'm going to just open Kirk's mic up and bring him in here because I am pretty sure that Kirk has a microphone. And for those who don't know, and I'm sure everybody does know at this point, Kirk runs the This Week in Radio Tech, an amazing show every Thursday, and he's just a wealth of information. So Kirk, tell us about MikroTik.
Well, and I got to tell you, I certainly appreciate what Alex is saying, and for the things that Alex does, he is so spot on and so right. And same for Kevin. And a lot of my stations are, I mean, my biggest station may be somewhere half the size of Baron Reed's operation. So I went through all the consumer routers and firewalls years ago, and I never had one last more than 8 or 9 months, and the stupid little wall wart died or something inside died, even some $200 consumer routers. And so somebody turned me on to MikroTik, and they're also designed and made in Riga, Latvia, and over there they call it MikroTik. And MikroTik has done a better and better job of coming up with easier GUI things to do. So you can set your DHCP pool, for example, from the GUI. Most things I need to do are reasonably easy to do. Now, I got to tell you that if you want some deep tech understanding on MikroTik, it is hard to find out there. It's usually people who don't speak English trying to explain it to you on a YouTube video. And of course, they're using a version that's different than your version, and it can be a real mess. So yes, there are times that I need help with MikroTik routers, and I'm willing to pay for those times. I also have a problem with the subscription model. I guess that came from my experience with SonicWall, where it seems like SonicWall had layers and layers of extra complexity just so they could charge you for subscription. And I've got friends who love SonicWall, but I've also talked to people who say that, well, there was a major satellite network in the broadcast industry that wanted their satellite receivers to phone home and let them know how they were doing. And if I told them, oh, I've got a SonicWall at this station, the director of engineering for this major satellite network said, oh, let's give up on that. The SonicWalls never work with our gear. So I don't know. I'm just passing along information here. Now, what I wanted to ask, though, is that one thing that I do have a problem configuring properly, because I've messed it up a million times, is getting a MikroTik to route 2 different subnets, typically my business network and my Axia network. So I want my Axia network to have a view of the internet, to be able to go out and get NTP time to keep my audio console's clocks up to date, for example. And I want no ingress from the outside, but I want, you know, egress to go find out what time it is. And I've had a tough time doing that with a MikroTik. I'm sure I'd have a tough time doing that with any router that I wasn't trained on or certificated in like Alex is. So look, I've done the easy, stupid thing. I take my MikroTik router, which serves my business network. I go and I add a second router to the Axia network. So the Axia network has to go through that router and through the main one to go ask what time it is out there on the internet. And hey, for $59, that solution works. And I'd like to hear, okay, I've heard some nebulous explanations from Alex saying, oh, that's complicated. Something goes wrong, you never know where it is, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. It's not been a problem for me. It's been really easy to add a $59 router to the Axia network, plug it into a port on the main router. Now, the two networks can't see each other, or at least the business network can't see the Axia network, which is what I want. I don't want them to see each other, but the Axia network has access to go get NTP time. I'm done talking. Maybe you guys could explore that a bit, because for me, the dual router thing is an easy poor man solution, and I'm just not seeing a problem with it.
Thoughts on that, guys?
That's fair.
Thanks for that, Kirk. That's useful.
That is one area of exception, I guess, would be, is, you know, audio over IP networks to try and shield them from the world, even though they need an NTP clock, which, if you do it right, your MikroTik can actually serve NTP out on a VLAN. And again, more in-depth and advanced stuff is outside of today's scope of VLANing and how to network segment and SD-WAN and stuff like that, where that would come into play on those MikroTiks, which does have, and you can absolutely plug your LiveWire network right into port 8 on the MikroTik and say that is this VLAN 200. The rest of your network is VLAN 100, and your phones are VLAN 75, and it knows how to deal with that. So yes, and then you can IP alias each one of those. So if you got 10.20.20.1 is your LiveWire network and 10.10.10.10 is your house network, they will never see each other unless you let them through that router. So that's, again, it's an advanced way of doing it, which a lot of people in the broadcast industry, unless you were brought up in the IT sphere, like the vast majority of the panel here, and Jeff not included, but you know, we understand how that works because that's our lives, especially Kevin with a TV facility where everything is VLAN and routed. You know, it's, yes, you can do it. Is it something I can explain to you in an hour? No.
Right. Now, one thing that Brian mentions too, he references WatchGuard as a firewall that they use.
WatchGuard is another commercial appliance, yep.
And just skipping back, Graham had mentioned that reason he asked about two routers originally was for multiple WANs or points of entry for transmitter site. They use 5G rocket dishes on the LAN, but yes, Aaron is describing our situation. Dual WAN here at the studios, but also have a WAN at the transmitter site using public internet for STL as a backup, tertiary, last case scenario. And yeah, I mean, ultimately the configuration that you go with and how you get there is going to, and that's why, again, beating the drum, map your network, figure out what you need to get from over here to over there. Then you can figure out how you're going to do it. But until you know what you got to accomplish, you can't figure out how.
Right, and multi-WAN and multiple gateways and stuff like that, without an appliance that knows about all of it, the failover will never work.
Kevin's nodding his head and looking like he's got something to say, so I'm going to let him get a word in.
Well, first off, a couple of points I wanted to make to what Kirk said, and I completely agree with Kirk in the concept that I completely get why you would do that dual router thing, because as Kirk was saying, like, is it best practice? Yeah, probably not, but at the same time, it works for a lot of people, and that's how they end up in that situation. They just do it, and it works. So what's the harm in it? Now, we can argue all day whether it's best practice, but I'm just saying that's how we end up in those situations. But by the way, and Ubiquiti has the same problem. There is not a lot of documentation, so you end up watching a lot of YouTube videos on how to do what you want to do with Ubiquiti stuff. And just from a management perspective, tying it back to this particular diagram and mapping everything out, yesterday this just came up where I was at a client station, and it's literally a 2-room operation. It is a studio and then like a lobby. And no care was set. All they did was plug everything into a Comcast business internet router, and that's they're online, which for most people works. I've encountered that a lot, and it works. But they had one machine that they were saying, well, I don't know if the internet's any good, because it's just slow and it doesn't work all the time. And I look at the machine, and they were using the wireless adapter on it and not the Ethernet adapter, and the wireless was coming from the building next door. So, and what that translates into is, for the user in the studio, that was the computer that they used to get all their news, all their information, do a lot of their production and things like that, that ends up costing them a lot of time and a lot of effort that they're wasting with a computer that doesn't work, because it was never thought of ahead of time, like, oh, we can just plug a Wi-Fi into it and be done with it. Well, no, it causes a lot of problems. So from a management perspective, that's a lot of lost time and lost productivity. That's why, really planning these things out and knowing where everything's going to be ahead of time is going to end up saving you in the long run.
Right. And I mean, it's another situation. And you take here, for example, down in Welton's dungeon of wayward weight equipment and various other things. But I've got the cable modem coming in. The laptop is hardwired to that, as is my mesh network, which runs the rest of the house, because the mesh network supplies 350 meg, but it's divided against all the devices in the house. And if the young fella is running his Minecraft server, for example, then that can cause some pretty glitchy internet on the Wi-Fi. And no, it's not the Log4j Minecraft server, I don't believe. What he does in his room is totally up to him. All I do is run Wireshark and make sure there's not too many bits going too many places. Tom asked a question here specifically, and Kirk may have brought it to mind, but when constructing a new AOIP Axia network, can I use VLAN on existing Cisco switches for that instead of buying and adding additional separate routers and switches for the AOIP network?
Yes, you
Alex.
can.
Maybe.
Oh, here we go.
Depends on which Cisco. Not all the
okay.
Ciscos can handle the multicast traffic.
Well, it depends on the size of your AOIP network. If you're only talking like 1 studio, 2 studios worth of stuff, not much, like an IQ and a couple of nodes, or in the Wheatstone world, a couple of blades and just 2 rooms worth of stuff, you can get away with the SG350 switches, which are GUI based, very friendly to use to the layman and really simple to do. But if you already have the higher end Cisco switches, which were the vast majority of AOIP facilities have at least a 2960, if not a 3560, for their routers or for the switching, you can very easily just say, well, I'm going to use VLAN 300 as my AOIP network, and you can assign those ports to be VLAN 300 only, and then you can have your house network on VLAN 100 on the first ones. Caveat: if you have any ports that are in VLAN 1, it gets everything. So don't have any other ports in VLAN 1, because that is the default VLAN, which is the broadcast domain of Cisco. So if you have the office, the receptionist PC plugged in, and it just still happens to be VLAN 1, you're going to see all the live wire traffic go to it, just because of the nature of the way it works. So make sure that you assign all your ports into a VLAN if you're going to go that route. But yes, I have a 3560X sitting here in my house that is half and half, 24 ports of house network, 24 ports of Axia network.
But if you've got like one of those Cisco RVs, the rebranded Linksys ones, those kinds of Ciscos, no, those won't work.
Yeah,
the SMB ones are a real hit or miss. I think the SG350 is about as basic as you can get, and it'll still handle Axia traffic. But you can also just, I think Axia, well, the TELUS Alliance, I think they still have a list posted on the site of which Ciscos are friendly with a live wire, and if they don't, certainly you can email or call them, and they'll happily tell you if you're your gear.
Yeah, email
meets the
support at
spec.
telosalliance.com, and they'll tell you exactly what they like and what they don't like. They've recently certified really high-end stuff, which Kevin would know the name. A lot of the radio guys have never heard of this name. They now certify Arista switches, which is very big in the TV world because they're stupid expensive and stupid fast. Fiber everything. So those ones, all the way down to like the SG350s, which you can pick up for like $400 for a 24-port switch now. That would be the SG350. I wouldn't mix networks too much on those. Again, like Aaron said, if you have a smaller network, 1 or 2 studios, maybe up to 3 studios, it'll handle the multicast traffic. Anything beyond that, you got to go to the big iron, because there's just so much there.
Yeah, like literally the processor inside the switch can't handle inside the router can't handle it. It will just barf, and you'll wonder why nothing's connecting through. It'll seem like for no good reason, it's just not working.
Right, and then when you're talking audio over IP, you're not looking at throughput or latency numbers. You're looking at what's called PPS, packets per second throughput. When you're doing audio over IP, whether it's AES-67, Dante, WheatNet, Livewire, does not matter. A standard stream in Livewire is 200 packets per second per stream, per direction. So a standard X node, you do the math there, 4 times, 200 packets per second, 4 in, 4 out. That's just one device. And if you turn those into live streams, then it goes to 4,000 packets per second. So like headphones, microphones, things like that. And again, Kirk can chime in on that more than we can. But that's the number you have to pay attention to. So you have to plan your network accordingly when you start diving into AOIP. Is how many packets per second do you intend to use? And the math should always be done at worst case scenario. So always account for the highest packet per second.
That's another good point for you're again mapping your network and not only figuring out what has to connect to where, but what throughput's required on any specific section of that network. Kirk had brought a follow-up here with a topic for advice, how to know when to do something kind of right or wrong yourself versus when to hire an IT pro, and how to know, and this one I'm tying in because, again, contractors in the house today. And one of them mentioned to me, it's like he says, it's kind of cool working with you because he goes, you at least know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about this stuff, because I can do sort of kind of do woodworking, but if I want it done right, I hire somebody who knows what they're doing. And so when do you do that in the IT world? When do you say, okay, it's going to be less expensive for me overall to hire somebody that knows? And Aaron, I'm going to direct this to you just because I know you do contract a lot of your IT stuff out.
Yeah, this is something of a pet peeve of mine. So yes, I'm going to evangelize here a little bit. The best story I can think of on this is y'all remember about 4 or 5 years ago when KQED got hit by that ransomware attack, and it completely destroyed their network for like 6 months. And it was chaos. They probably lost millions in productivity. I mean, they are a major PBS NPR outlet in a top 10 market, and it just completely destroyed them. But there was this great little nugget of information in the write-up that KQED did about the whole story that I thought was very telling, was that they had 2% of their entire staff was technical people devoted to managing the networks. And the industry standard for media companies is 6.5%. And I think for all companies, it's closer to 5%. So really, that's the metric that I feel everyone should be basing off of, is if you can't afford to devote roughly 5% of your staff to IT, and whether that's a half-time person, whether it's a full-time person, whether it's a dozen full-time people, it doesn't matter. It scales with the size of your organization, because the size of the organization is going to scale up your network. I'm not thrilled to admit that we don't meet that criteria right now. It's something I've been fighting for several years on that front, and we went a long way towards getting it closer when we outsourced to our particular company. It's Automated Business Solutions, which they're based in Rhode Island, so I don't think that helps too many people here. But there are literally thousands of them out there, and many of them are actually quite good too. So, probably your local chamber of commerce could be one of your great sources for finding a good one.
The one thing IT is going to be really good at is acronyms. What Aaron is describing is what you're going to go look for is called an MSP, a managed service provider. These are the guys who are going to come in, be your frontline help desk even, open a trouble ticket, can't get email, things like that. Things that Aaron doesn't have the time to answer because he's trying to get STLs to work through trees off of a church tower, things like that. He's got his hands full. The MSP is going to come in, take care of that. They're going to do your backup solution. They're going to be your firewall guy that knows that equipment. They're going to suggest that equipment. And yes, they're probably going to be a subscription or retainer-based service. But as Aaron said, if you don't have that 5% staff resourcing, this is what you're in for.
Yeah, and more as we talk. And I mean, it's the buzz phrase these days, but virtualization, more stuff being offshore or software based, et cetera, and so on. IT is no longer, it really does need to be something that has dedicated staff, and I mean, a lot of us, and I'll be the first to admit, like I said, when I started, we had 2 computers connected with a coax, I cut my teeth on IT stringing Cat3 through the rafters at the head office. And quite literally, that's how I learned how a Novell network went together physically. And that was good times, man, good times. But but you do hit a point where if you can't have a dedicated IT staff, it almost is less expensive in the long run to outsource it, like Aaron said, and definitely. First time you avoid a ransomware attack, it's paid for itself. Now, not like insurance, it's like maintenance. If it never breaks, how do you know that the guy fixing it is actually doing his job? Well, because it never broke.
Right. So I mean, in the interest of time, I mean, that's kind of where I think, looking at this picture here, ideally, if you drew out your network at your radio station, would it look like this? Yeah. And if it doesn't, why not? What's missing? And because like one of the things there you see is switch to switch, they all go back to the router. So the router has enough ports to support the extra firewall, the other switch, the server, the incoming WAN connection, the other switch, so on and so forth. One, let's cover the don'ts of network topology. Don't take that switch on right straight south of the router there and then take a port 47 and plug it into port 48 on the next switch over. Do not daisy chain your switches, because then everything on that 48 ports is relying on that one link to go back to this switch to get to the world.
Right, you've removed your redundancy.
Well, then you bottlenecked everything.
One other thing to mention, and getting back to MSPs, the service providers real quick, Jim asked, what typically is response time and what's your reasonably expected response time? And I think, I know from the few experiences I've had with this, the basic answer is what do you want, and what will you pay for?
Yep.
Because
how much can you afford?
You can buy different levels of service, right?
Yeah, we had a very, very long conversation with ABS about this when we hired them. And they were, I got to be honest, they were very upfront with us. They were very accommodating, but they were also very blunt when they said, if you want 24/7, 365 coverage, it will cost you this amount. And it was a lot of money. I mean, a lot of money. At that point, I think within 2 years, we would have been far better off just paying to hire someone full time at that point, even though it would be one full-time person versus a company providing services. We ultimately went for, I think, business hours. And we have the option to, if something is really urgent enough, we can call them outside of business hours and they will bill us through the nose for it, but at least it's an option. We have fortunately never had to do that anytime there's been an outside of business hours problem. One of two things happens. Either the person screaming for help suddenly decides that it's not all that big a problem after all when I tell them it's coming out of their budget, or it was something big enough and I was able to handle it, come up with a solution that lasted until business hours rolled around. That's really what it is. It's how much you're willing to spend.
Something to mention too about how MSPs work. MSPs are great for the small business, the average, restaurant or small shop, or even, a startup business. The one thing they do not understand is media. So do not ask them to figure out your live wire network. Do not figure out your automation network. Do not ask them to do specialized software. That is your domain. They will not get into that wheelhouse. A lot of them will just say, we're not touching it. You have to do a demarcation of that MSP to say, you're handling my end users, their laptops, my routers and firewalls, but my automation network and my AOIP network, I understand are all mine, because if they do something wrong, equally off the air.
Yeah.
So, you know, draw that line, because a lot of them will get scared and they'll put their best practices right into your AOIP network, which will end up in a bad day.
Yeah.
And that's another, I mean, expectation management. In sales, we talk about it all the time because, you know, with deliveries or when can I have this, or how much will this be, or what features, you know, so, but the same token, it's, you've almost got to present your expectations to the MSP at the onset when you do the initial negotiation dance to see what they're comfortable doing, and then come to the middle ground and figure out what you do to accommodate the rest. Quick side note, we're pushing at the top of the hour. We have not even got off the first slide yet, so we're going to be running late, folks. Guaranteed, not a question. It never is a question, especially with this cast of characters. One fellow came in late, hope there will be a link for the recording. If you register for this, you will automatically get a link for the recording once it gets it posted. It's pretty prompt, usually happens in a day or two. He doesn't tend to run long like I do, but there you go. It's what you signed up for. This is why we archive this stuff. So moving forward, just a real quick, and I think we've covered a good chunk of this already in the conversation, but this is your basic structure of how point A talks to point B. So this is Aaron's studio to site link, basically.
Yep. This is exactly what you see. This is how every internet traffic happens, from whether it's your business, your home, kid's tablet, the Nintendo Switch, to Microsoft servers to play Minecraft. The Minecraft servers are actually behind a router or using a private IP scheme, probably on Azure, you know, so they got a, you know, 10.22 whatever, and you've got a 10.22, but the routers between them are using the public IP space, you know, 1.1, 12.1.1, 13.1.1, real IP addresses.
Yeah.
So
and
the routers handle that.
Right. It's just basically translation. It's like, oh, you want to go there? Well, I'll get you there. And once you get there, then the router on the other end says, oh, you want this? Yeah, that's over at this address.
Yeah, so, and if you lift up the skirt on the cloud that is the internet, you be ready for some serious stuff to see how that actually works. But way over the head of today, for sure.
So we're just going to high speed this one. This is courtesy of Wayne Pacina at SBE, but and Texas Tech, but A&M. I can't remember. Texas based. We like Wayne Go Aggies, but talking about the different layers, and as a rule, I mean, 1, 2, 3. Layer 1's a hub. Beyond that, what do I got?
Layer 2 is a switch. Layer 3 is your firewall. Layer 4 is actually above that. 4 through 7 is everything else active. You know, that's presentation layer application. When you see a web page, things like that. The session is actually negotiating a web page interaction or a game interaction, establishing those links, so on and so forth.
Oh.
So
and we do a lot of talk, and I mean, I've heard a lot of talk, especially if you're managing a network with HD traffic on it for HD radio data and stuff. We talk about using layer 3 managed switches to get stuff from point A to point B. Kevin, can you address that at all? Is that something you mess with? You route a lot more stuff than I do, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking for firewalls?
Well, more for just getting data from point A to point B, crossing subnets, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of that. A lot of our stuff is all, I mean, there's like 12 different VLANs that we run here. Actually, 14 now. I misspoke. So yes, we do a lot of that. And a lot of that's because, you know, when you start scaling up, you basically have to. Just because if you have one network for however many, you know, if you're talking even 100 employees or something like that, it's going to become a mess. And but for any other reason, just for your own organization's sake, because, you know, you have different stuff and different things, but you got to keep that traffic contained. And the best way to do it, kind of the way we looked at it, is we took like a segmented approach. So we divided up all our sections by basically physical locations in the building, which is we said, okay, radio studios are one, TV master controls another, TV productions another, transmitter sites another, transmitter sites another, like 3 different transmitters. Like basically everything is its own segmented to its own VLAN, and it's not just good for traffic, but for your own organization's sake, so that you can put the same devices. Like if you have multiple of the same devices, like all our remote controls are the same IP address, just with one different number difference. So it's like 12.3, 13.3, these kinds of things.
And speaking of that scaling level, Eric Pappenfuss just reminds me that WPR has 153 VLANs right now.
Yeah. So there you go. Not showing off at all on that end. And I mean,
Hold my beer.
The other thing to remember too, and this is more device specific, but if you look at, and I'll pick HD radio for example, anybody who's running it will know this, but HD data by default is done in UDP broadcast mode. So it's fired out to every device on the network. You can, with our stuff, you can run TCP. So now you've got two-way traffic. And again, you can flood the network with data, or you can, we've got reliable HD transport in all of our HD gear that you can turn on and do a point-to-point or point-to-multipoint if you need to address like main standby exciters. So the reason I bring that up, and I'm just using that as an example of something I'm aware of, because I'm not aware of a lot some days, but whatever you can do to minimize the amount of data you're firing out there. If you've got 8 devices flooding the network to everything, it like Kevin was said, it can become a traffic nightmare.
Well, it's funny you say the HD data, because we actually, so we've got our 2 transmitter sites, or 2 primary transmitter sites, and we actually we have 2 different exporters, and those have their own VLAN. They are on their own VLAN, and just that VLAN goes to the one site for exactly that reason, because it's a broadcast traffic, and then that way it's a reliable way to get it there. And VLANs are, it's not like it costs you more to add a VLAN, like you just keep it contained and it goes.
Yeah, just a couple of lines of code. That's the line we use here whenever anybody asks for another feature. Meanwhile, Alex, for what it's worth, over in the questions comment, Shane Toven, who's with K-Love Air One, says he's basically just gave you your beer back.
Yeah, well, nationwide versus statewide.
All right, so and yeah, as you say, the firewall's on layer 3. Wayne has also put the absolutely the 10 things you should do for any network. I'm just putting this up there. We won't hit them point by point, but they go up there for the archive. So we've got a visible, somebody can pause the replay and look and take notes and say, okay, yeah, no, we're not doing that. The one big thing, if you're not using a port, close that port. And again, this comes back to almost the zero trust concept. If you don't specifically need this device to have port 80 open, or port, shoot, I forget the SSL port, 21?
SSH 22.
Right, sorry. Then close everything you don't need. But
that's for if you run a Linux server, shut down the services that you don't need.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, even though they're on your LAN, if you have Telnet or SSH or character generator echo port running on a Linux server, because they're on by default. They're sub 1024 ports, which are super user ports. Yeah. Turn the services off. Learn how to turn off services that you don't use, don't need.
Right. So that's a good point too. All right, flicking forward, the reason I say all this is because somebody who looks a lot like me will jump on some publicly available website and do a quick search for, say, the word, I don't know, barracks as an example. And so it's no big secret that prior to 2017, if you owned a barracks box, the default username and password, well, there were no default username and password. If somebody had the IP address, they had access. This is one I found about 3 hours ago. Fully accessible, wide open. I could very cheerfully go in, repoint the thing or redirect it to my own web stream of whatever I happen to be running. I could sign a password so that they can't get into it. And at that point, I basically hijack myself a radio station. And some people are like, well, we use port forwarding, so it's not the default ports. And that's great until somebody who looks a lot like me starts skipping past the port forwarding and doing a little more. And before we get that, Alex, so port forwarding is a poor man's way of getting a little bit of security. You know, we've talked about it before, but it's not ideal. How come?
Well, it comes back to that zero trust. By default, routers block everything from the outside world. And that's been standard now for 15 years. Anything you buy from the cheap TP links all the way up to Juniper and Palo Alto, everything by default on the WAN port is disabled. Nothing goes in. You know, simple as that. Now, port forwarding is you have a device in the inside, like a transmitter, that you need to contact from the outside world because it's over here and you're over here. So you go through the public internet and you port forward port 80 and 3501 to get to AUI, so that the router knows that, oh, so on those ports I'm going to send it to 192.168.1.50, and it just does that port address translation. It's called network address translation. Shoves it right in, and it sends it back out to public IP space. Why is that bad? Well, your next slide. It means it's open to everybody in the world who wants to go find it. You did not put in, when you do NAT, you cannot put source IP in most routers by default. So it's just going to let everybody into those ports. Now, some of the fancier routers will say only allow from these IP addresses. So if you have a static IP at the office or your house, then it will only accept that connection from those IPs. That's a little bit better. Still not great, but a little bit better.
And the reason I brought this up and why this slide is here, so I jumped on my favorite little IoT search engine shortly before we opened this session. And of course, the first thing I look for is Nautel. And when I find Nautel, the only thing I find are a couple of our backup servers and a few things in the engineering lab that are pretty well locked down, and it's okay, cool. I found 2 transmitters, neither of which had default passwords. That's a big step above what I usually find, so that's pretty good. However, then I search Barracks, which is my go-to, and when I find Barracks, this is one of the hits I got. And so I start poking at the open ports. There's a Nautel transmitter, there's a Barracks streaming client, there's an Innovonics RDS generator. At this point, I can control everything that goes out over their network. Oh, but look, there's their TP-Link wireless router. All of it had the default usernames and passwords, except for the transmitter, which I couldn't get into easily.
Well, and it's easy for stuff like that to come up simply because that's the stuff that does need to come from the external world. I mean, I've seen installations exactly like this that, you know, you're connecting to a transmitter site, it has to come from somewhere else. But, you know, this is what we're going to dive into in coming weeks, but this is where a VPN comes in handy.
Right.
Yes.
Well, let's use the Barracks where they've port forwarded 8081 to port 80 of their Barracks, when all they really needed was the port 3030, which you can see in the little there, to just connect the audio. You do not need the web portion. You just need the RTP.
Right. And that's something that Shane mentions in the background, that security through obscurity is almost worse than no security at all, followed immediately by VPNs are your friend. And
like going to the bar, getting drunk, handing them the keys and saying, here, can you take me home? By the way, you can keep the car when you're done.
So this was just one of the biggest examples I've encountered in a long time of a whole lot of open stuff found on one very simple IoT search. And yeah, you definitely, you know, I tried as much as I could to block IP addresses because, well, you know, I don't want to create too much low-hanging fruit, but by all means, this is the stuff, if somebody can see it, it becomes a target for hacking. So basically VPN, I mean, we're not getting into VPNs today. We're pretty much at the end of the time. Kevin brought up the idea about VPNs, and so he's going to star in our VPN session next week. And this is the preamble to that. Alex is going to be there for comic relief and technical background. But Alex, VPN, this is one you sent me, and you're using a Sophos diagram, obviously.
Right. Yeah. So, you know, again, the appliance-based VPN, routers, switch, whatever, these are that device that is designed to do that. So you got site 1, site 2. Notice they have different IP address schemes. on the world, but they have remote users, which a lot of us have moved into, where your jocks are working from home or your hosts are working from home, or half of your staff can't get to the office for some reason or another. They're considered remote users that need access to certain services at the facility, but how do you control it? And this is one way you can, again, when you start putting it all together, you know, the VLAN for the billing department, well, the billing people need to get into just the billing side, so you can make that VPN only see that network. You can, you know, the jocks need to get into the automation to do voice tracking. They can only see that network, so on and so forth. So you get into that world, and then you got device to device. So this is the best of all three worlds here. So you got site 1, site 2, and then you got remote users over here. And in order for the remote user, he's only allowed into site 1. He can't get to site 2. But site 1 and site 2 can see each other as if they were sitting next to each other through the other IP tunnel there. So it's, in the layman's term, is, again, VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. So it uses the internet to make the connection, but it's encrypted and logically looks like it is sitting next to each other. And you have utmost control over it, and it won't show up on these IoT searches because it's not there.
Tom mentions on a little side note, lots of us use AnyDesk and similar apps to access remote sites via the public network. And like I know for mine, and we've had this discussion before, and you always roll your eyes at me, but like I use real VNC, just virtual network connection. So are these apps really secure?
No.
Are they more secure than nothing?
Yes.
Okay, and I know TeamViewer had an issue not too long ago as one example, but so talk to that a little bit, like VNC versus VPN.
So VNC is, they're apples and kumquats. VNC is, you know, a remote desktop system. It allows me to go see a monitor of another machine, you know, and control that machine remotely. You would use VNC in conjunction over a VPN to shield that, instead of port forwarding port 5900 and 5901 through the public internet to get to that machine. So they would use together in that respect. You've got the TeamViewers of the world, Pulseway, Splashtop, AnyDesk, take your pick. They all claim that they're secure. Problem is best laid plans of mice and men. You know, if you think you're getting a free remote desktop aggregator, you are the product. You know, same with using Google Remote Desktop, you are the product. You know, things of that sort. So yes, there are better ones out there than others, but it doesn't take much of social engineering. I could call your receptionist and say, hey, download this program for me, and boom, I'm in. So there's only so much a technical person can do, but will never get rid of the human factor. Show of hands, how many of you will remember the movie Hackers? Come on.
Still trying to forget it.
Right? Well, but it's still very applicable. Right out of the front, I just called the front desk. I need this. Give me the phone number on the modem. I'm in.
And that's a fair point, Alex, that to touch on that, a lot of this hardware and a lot of the software has gotten sophisticated enough, because it used to be like, if you just had a basic firewall, like that was enough, like to keep most of the traffic out. And what's happened is, you know, you just get smarter criminals. You get people that get more sophisticated at what they're doing. And so as a result, they've now shifted gears from trying to just brute force get into your network to just, like you said, call the receptionist and ask for a contact person and basically guess their way into your network through social engineering. That's the real threat, and that's where ransomware comes in, and that's why that's such a big problem, because it isn't so much the hardware that's the problem anymore. You know, you see people that run 15 different versions of antivirus software that all are meaningless. It's down to the end user that's the problem.
And some of that's getting a lot better. I mean, I got an email last week that said, here's the invoice we discussed with a PDF attachment. Now, I'm super paranoid, and I didn't discuss anything with anybody, so I deleted it without even reading it. And then I checked at the IT folks, said, hey, can you take a look at this email in my on the server? And he comes back and says, I hope you didn't click it. And I said, nope. And, you know, but yeah, I mean, on average, I would guess I get 1 or 2 of those emails a day, roughly. and I'm not, well, I guess relatively speaking, email address wise, I'm probably higher visibility than some. One note back here, Dan had asked what I use to look at IoT. That's no big deal. It's called Shodan, SHODAN.io. Like I said, I certainly don't mind sharing it out, but by all means, use it responsibly. It is a very powerful tool that a lot of people shouldn't be messing with.
And there's 2 free tools I want to mention really quick too for you. It's called penetration testing, right? This is actually part of the security world in the gray hat, white hat hacker world. There are 2 tools that you should be using against yourself: advanced port scanner and advanced IP scanner. Both of those will tell you everything you need to know about inside or outside your network. Give it an IP address, it will tell you every little detail what it finds, and you can print that report out.
I haven't looked to see if he's on the attendee list. He is not, but there's an engineer out west now, used to be out east. Tom Morris used to like to port scan just about, and you can blow up a lot of equipment with a port scan sometimes. So yeah, again, use
caveat
it.
emptor, but yes, you should be using it against yourself to know what your vulnerabilities already are.
Right. In the background, Shane's mentioned that he got an email recently from his SBE reflector saying his email account was going to be disabled unless he clicked the link. And yeah, I get those on a daily basis too. Usually the giveaways are the poor grammar, but they're getting a little better at that. So, definitely pay attention. Now, one of the things we were talking about, this is a physical VPN tunnel, and I think the last content slide, but you'd talked a bit about virtualization, and again, we'll do a full VPN session next week,
Sure.
and Kevin has done a lot of that recently.
Yeah, so there's a software version of VPN out there called SoftEther. It was created by the University of Japan at Osaka. So it was, how do we get all these other VPN companies to play nice? Because that is actually a problem. Like you said, get the Sonic walls to talk to a FortiGate, to talk to a Palo Alto. It just doesn't freaking happen. So they go down to the lowest common denominator, which is whether it's an SSL VPN or it's an IPsec VPN, which are the bottom of the barrel as far as VPN is concerned. They run the slowest. They're better than nothing. Don't get me wrong, but they are they're the G711 codec of VPNs. They are at that level. So if you don't have the ability or wherewithal, or you want to just see what you can do already without any investment, SoftEther, you can put that on a server or a machine as a server to go from one site to the other to do proof of concepting with. In a couple of other Would-Not Tell webinars, I did this to run some of our virtual HD demo, where I used this in the Amazon cloud. The server sat on my free AWS, and all the clients connected to that, and I was able to get the audio from my house to go to the exporter in Halifax using software like this. As a matter of fact, that exact software.
So there are options out there, and again, we'll talk about that more next week. So there's my little list of points to ponder. I should have put map it. I did throw, Alex had and it was one of the advanced questions, useful tips on training, and CBT Nuggets was a pretty cool site for learning a lot of stuff. So last thoughts, we're already 21 minutes past the hour. Kevin Trueblood, what are the top things to think about when you're looking at networking?
Like we were saying earlier, planning it out is probably the best thing you can do. Just when you're actually putting together a network, figuring out what you want it to be, and yes, take it seriously. A lot of people, I mean, it's easy when you're a 10-person operation or even a 5-person operation that operates in a 3-room office to just plug everything into a Comcast internet router and call it a day, and that works for you. But as you start scaling up, you need to dedicate the resources to it if you're going to be putting stuff out. If you're putting servers out there, if you're putting devices that are actually exposed to the internet, it's not a problem until it's a problem. Because I'm sure a lot of people will say, well, I've been doing this for years and I've always gotten away with it. Well, great. That doesn't mean it's not going to still happen tomorrow. And that's, KQED probably didn't think they were going to get shut down from ransomware until they did. So it can happen to you. you have to take these things very seriously. And even just a little bit amount of planning will put you ahead of a lot of other people and will make your staff ultimately more productive as a result.
Yeah, and I mean, it can go a step further. I mean, we've had what we call a second level removed threat insofar as somebody hacked one of our customers' emails and was sending email out using one of our notel.com email addresses claiming to have an invoice attached. Well, if you hit a radio station, odds are somebody in their contact list is probably, I hope they're going to know who we are. So they get an email from us. And so, yeah, you know, it's more and more, you can't trust email from people you do know. All right, top thoughts. Aaron, what do you think?
Those guys know more than I do.
That's again, that's why I bring you guys in here, because same
Yeah,
reason.
I mean, although actually that's probably the best way to describe this. I mean, yes, these two guys to either side of me on the display do know a hell of a lot more than I do. That's why a major reason why I went out and got signed up with an MSP was because I didn't have the time and we didn't have the budget to pay for a full-time IT person who does know all this stuff and can deal with it all. We are working towards that. But for the moment, it's a hell of a lot better than just relying on me kind of hacking all this stuff together and praying that I can figure this stuff out by watching enough YouTube videos. You know, I like to think that we've got a fairly functional network right now, but I know that I could sure do a hell of a lot more to make it better.
Right. And I mean, that's like I told the wife when she said she wanted the bathroom redone. I said, well, we can do it one of two ways. I said, I can do it. It'll cost less, but it'll take about 10 years because, A, I have a full-time job, and B, I will have to research how to do a lot of this stuff. I said, or we can pay a little more and have somebody that knows what they're doing come in and do it, and it'll look a lot better and be done a lot faster. You know, it just costs a little more. So yeah, you definitely make your call based on your skill set, what you have for time and resources.
But one way or another, the piper gets paid. I mean, yeah, we talked about KQED, but remember, I mean, I think we've talked about this in previous Nautel webinars. There was that whole rash of a dozen different stations at least, many of which were like 5 to 10 man operations all over the country, small little AM stations, small little FM clusters that were getting destroyed by ransomware hackers on a near weekly basis. I think that was back in like 2018, 2019.
Right.
And
I mean,
yeah, it can absolutely happen to you.
Yeah, I mean, it makes the news when it's one of the bigger groups that it happens to, but there are a lot of smaller ones where you just don't read about it in the trade magazines, and it's still happening just because you don't know about it. Alex, final thoughts before we wrap it up.
Well, those guys there, you know, the more the management and stuff like that, you know, where they know their limits. I'm the other side of the guys, right? I'm the guy who, if these guys have the question, they call me for the answer. So it's my job to know what they're asking for, or even like Kirk, how that whole thing works with his microtik. You know, I enjoy doing that. I mean, like I said, the manuals that I enjoy reading start looking like that. You know, back in the day, this is what ran the internet's email before Outlook and everything else. This is a 900-page book on how to use email. So, and how it gets from point A to point B. Or even, and this book is now in volumes of building internet firewalls. And this is from 2000. You know, this is a 20-year-old book. So, you know, I'm the guy who's supposed to know these answers when they call, and I'm that MSP of the broadcast world because, you know, the MSPs that like Aaron hired, great for handling of the day-to-day office traffic, you know, Outlook and stuff like that. But when someone says, hey, how do I use a VLAN on my switch and stuff like that for my audio over IP network or my video network, how do I get my SAN storage for my asset deployment and inventory system going over here? That's where you start moving into a much more advanced level and the dollar signs start coming out, because knowing that knowledge is expensive. Not going to lie. So realize that when you go into networking, know what you're doing, know your limits. Very much so, know your limits. When you start poking around and you see something you don't know in your firewall, Google it for a second, just a couple of keywords, find out what that means. Should you be turning it on or should you be turning it off?
Yeah.
Those are the things that you really need to start with as a non-IT person. I realize we've got guys who could run rings around all of us when it comes to tuning up a transmitter. I'm not going to lie, but the IT stuff is like, well, I just called the phone company, they dropped a DSL line, and I just took the Ethernet jack out of that, plugged it in the transmitter, and I'm done, right?
Yeah. Not quite. Aaron's making the face.
Yeah. So know your limits is my big takeaway from today. Is if you want to learn it, everything is out there to learn it.
Yeah.
You will not learn it in an hour and a half. You will not learn it in a week. You will not learn it in a month. I've been doing IT longer than I've been doing broadcast, and I've been doing broadcast now for 21 years.
Yep.
So I'm at that level where, this is, like I said, this was the job I started before broadcast is when I bought these books. So it takes time. If you want to travel down that road, yes, it is there for you to do. And yes, the broadcast industry is going this way, whether you like it or not. This is where your future is. You should know at least the basics.
One little side note that we were talking about before the show started, and you and I had this discussion about resources, and we mentioned the CPT nuggets that I've got up on the screen. You'd mentioned that Networking for Dummies, of which I've got one of the first editions, but you said the latest edition is fairly recent and current all the way up to Windows 10 at least.
Yep, Windows 10 and 11 were actually highlighted in the current version. If you just look around on the internet, you'll probably find a copy. I don't recommend buying dead trees anymore. Little eco-friendly.
Excuse me, I like the dead trees. Thank you very much.
I know a lot of guys like the dead trees, but the PDF is out there for those with e-readers. Because the problem with the IT world is this book is no more valid than anything 20 years ago is. Basics in here are applicable, but that's about it. The fundamentals, it will have no application in 2022.
And that is a challenge too. I mean, my Windows 3.1 manual probably isn't going to do me a whole lot of good today.
No.
But so
same with
those
my
are the kind
Network
of
412.
Right. All right. On that note, as with last week, we're about half an hour past the top of the hour. This webinar, as with all of our webinars, is recorded. You can get to it through the resources tab on our website or through our YouTube channel. Fiona was after me for Waves content not too long ago, so that may be coming again soon. Curtis mentions that the paper manuals, the dead trees can keep you warm if the power goes out. And the way our power grid's been running in the past, we've had a storm every weekend this month, and we've got another one coming this weekend. So or every weekend this year. I forgot we're in February already. And then online info, bdr.net, broadcastengineering.info, a Facebook page for whatever you may be entertained by. Some of them more valuable than others. There's always a wheat versus chaff contingency. But by all means, reach out to any or all of us. And on that note, I want to thank Kevin, Aaron, Alex. I want to thank the three of you for spending your time with me today. It's been really educational. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
You're welcome.
Happy to be here.
And on that note, we've had 90 odd people hung in right straight through to the bitter end, even half an hour past the normal quitting time. So folks, I want to thank you more than I can ever say. Without you, these wouldn't be possible. Definitely fill out your survey. Tell us what we did right. Tell us what we did wrong, because can't fix it if I don't know I screwed it up. And give us suggestions for future sessions. Again, next week, talking VPNs. Yeehaw. On that note, folks, thank you very much for your time. Have a great day. Bye now.